Check 1 2 1 2. Good? All right. We can just upload, if you got a flash drive, let's just upload it
Yep.
here now.
So we have like the
Is there another? There should be another one, right? Another slot over there.
Yeah.
Okay. And so Dr. Salvatore
Oh, you got it?
will introduce you and
Okay.
yeah. And then after your keynote, we'll take like a few minute break and then go into your workshop.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a few minutes.
Okay. You want me to just like save
Yeah,
it here
let's just,
or?
This is the only thing you need on this laptop?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's copy it. I'll copy it down to this laptop. So if you want, you can take your flash drive out, or if you want to leave it in, we can do that too.
Okay.
If you could find your seats, that'd be great. We're going to get started. If you find your way to your seats.
If you stay in front of the screen, you could.
Oh, yeah, that's all right. Perfect. That's good. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our annual assessment summit. It's only our second one, but we're really excited about it. It's great to see every seat filled, even for those who are making their way to seats. So this morning, a routine that I do, first I just want to say on behalf of the president, welcome to the visitors on our campus who are new to Kean University. We welcome as well. This morning, everybody has a routine in the morning. This morning I woke up and I typically read something. And it's usually not like social media profiles. It's something a little better for my mental health, right? So, and I read a newsletter this morning and it talked about artificial intelligence. It's like every topic right now, right? And it talked about how bots are actually now producing content for other bots on social media. And I said, wow, we really are becoming really intelligent, right? But it's pretty artificial. And this is the scary thing. How do we stay ahead of it? And you're probably saying, what is he talking about? What does this have to do with assessment? Well, let me share with you is this. The separator from us and these bots and this artificial world of intelligence that's being created is our authenticity. It's our uniqueness. It's who we are. And this is what assessment's all about. It's not about the numbers. It's about the narratives connected to those numbers. Great assessment is just a really great study. It starts with reflection. It starts with a problem, a purpose, some driving questions of how are we going to address this? And then a mechanism to measure it. And the last piece is, well, kind of how do we save the world, right? How do we put this in motion and continue to do it again and again and again? Today, I have the great pleasure to introduce somebody who's traveled a little ways here today. She had us a little nervous because she's not familiar with Newark traffic patterns, or Elizabeth, but she did make it here safely and on time. But I think when we think about who should speak in front of everybody, we have to think about somebody whose worlds collided in different paths. You see, Dr. Bethany Miller has a number of intersections in the work that she does. So imagine being able to find the right person who understands data and assessment through the world of, or through the lens of an institutional researcher. Somebody who's really passionate about student success and what it takes to get there and using data to make sure that happens. And then that last world that comes in is that equity-focused lens that we're trying to build and create here and refine. So today's speaker, Dr. Bethany Miller, comes to us from Macalester, where she's the associate provost. She leads several committees. I would think you were like a quiet architect of what's happening behind the scenes, the attention to data at schools, and how we're all working together to address the equity gaps that exist, not just on Kane's campus, but on campuses throughout the country. So today, without further ado, we are really excited to welcome, well, can we give a Kane welcome to Dr. Bethany Miller? You want it up here?
I know, I'm good. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. I will have to say that everyone on my campus would have burst into laughter when you said quiet. They'd be like, that is the very last thing that she is. Sometimes we probably wish she would be quiet. Right? But I thank you for the very kind and warm introduction. Thank you all for the very kind welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule in what I know to be a very busy part of the academic year to come and listen to some random person talk, right? And so I think all of the things that you said about me are true, right? I am super committed to student success. That is the thing that gets me out of the bed in the morning and probably angrier at some of my coworkers than they would like. It is the thing that continues to push me forward when, like, this work is hard, right? It's not easy. It's not always fun. People aren't always like super happy to do it. Like, it's like we put together all of the things that people don't love. Like, student success is probably the most loved of them all, but like assessment, who wants to talk about that? You know, equity, people want to talk about it, but it's really hard and it's uncomfortable. So all of these things sort of come together. Can you help me fix my thing? Sorry. And so now you all have learned my first secret, that I'm not super duper tech savvy. Great, thank you. Which my team always thinks is funny. They're like, you're the person who is like Power BI and dashboards and like doing all the work on artificial intelligence, but then you can't get your PowerPoint to work. So what I intend to talk about this morning is equity-centered assessment. It's not what you think. Because most often when we think about equity, people have a very particular way that they think about that. And so I want to upend a little bit of that this morning and also upend some of our thinking around assessment. So we'll start because, you know, what assessment person can have a presentation without objectives? We should all have some sort of outcome. And really, the big point is that I hope you walk away with some sort of idea that sparks you. If you read the rest of these things, that's great. But really, that you walk away feeling like you got something out of the time together. The other thing that I want to recognize is that the context of this is hard, right? It's hard inside of society. It's hard inside of higher education as a sector. It's hard inside of our individual institutions. It's hard inside of our departments. And it can be hard inside of our classrooms, right? Because all of these things, when we think about assessment, when we think about equity, we think about inclusion, belonging, and those pieces coming together, it changes every single time, right? And so that's a challenge. And so if we paused for a moment, so say, asked you to pause and think about how you define equity and what's the very first thing that comes to your mind. And so I'll say the easiest and most uncomfortable thing, that when most people think equity, they think race, right? And that is one piece of it. It's an important piece, but it's not the only piece, because lots of inequities exist inside of society and inside of our institutions. And so that's one of the pieces that makes this really hard, because how do we meet every person where they are to think about the myriad of inequities and intersectional identities that come together that challenge student success, that challenge students being able to demonstrate that they have learned, acquired new knowledge, are building competency, or can demonstrate proficient or deep learning in a subject area. And so this quote comes from AAC&U, and this is a quote, it's from 2021, but I really like it, and it really resonates with me in terms of how do we pause and sort of think about the moment. And so as we look to the future, this moment provides an excellent opportunity to reflect upon our practices, to determine which were effective and which require revision, and to ask ourselves if these practices serve quality learning and further our equity goals, or if they serve to erode those aspirations. And so this is something that I have posted in my office, I share with my team, I share with other leaders and other folks on campus, because I think we ask our students to reflect on their learning all the time, right? And that's a really important part of learning. But as adults and extended learners, we don't always pause to reflect on our work in this way. And I think sometimes that is one of the things that holds us back from reaching our goals. I know you're having an assessment day, it's an annual event, so you don't have any of these problems on your campus. But trust me, on some campus somewhere on this planet, people are just sort of throwing ideas at the wall to see what sticks without any sort of assessment, without any sort of evaluation, without any sort of pausing and reflection to see why something may have worked or why it didn't work, whether it's related to resources and not just money, but time, talent, human capacity, and how did it impact the people who were in that room and were supposed to be impacted, and who wasn't in the room who may have been impacted. And so we'll start with this. This comes from Equity Talk to Equity Walk by Tia Brown McNair, Estella Ben-Simone, and Lindsay Malcolm Picot. And this quote really is about the idea that when we are engaged in the authentic exercise of equity and equity-mindedness as a part of our work, it is not enough for individuals to think that they can do the work. This really says that we have to pay explicit attention to structural inequality, institutionalized racism, and demand system-changing responses, right? So this is like, well, you know, Bethany did this one thing, so now everything is all fixed at Macalester, at Kane, at whatever institution. No, like when we make these exceptions, when we pay attention to these things, we need to understand what are the systems in place and how are people being impacted, and recognizing that one-to-one solutions are not going to necessarily make the wholesale difference that we want to make, right? Because for every student who comes in and you recognize that they have a problem, we're trying to help them address this problem, I can guarantee you there are probably 3 to 4 students who won't come in, who won't see, and will just sort of be in the cracks. And if we adjust and try to address these problems systematically, then it becomes a whole different sort of net for students in terms of everyone, whether they know how to like navigate the systems of our institutions or not, being able to be sort of caught up and captured and helped in a way that we would not be able to do if we were still just doing it one-to-one. Does that make sense? Okay. And so here is the first place where maybe your mind will like be shaken a bit. Everybody's probably seen this image, right? And familiar with trying to establish the difference between equality and equity. And so I happened to be like searching through and looking at a whole host of these images one day, and I thought, what's still wrong with this, right? What's still wrong with the way that we are thinking about this? And one of the things that came to me is that yes, there's a difference between equality and equity, but we're thinking about equity from the starting point and the starting point only, not from a results perspective, right? So if I need only the shortest box to get an apple, why is it that our equity goal is, yes, level 1 equity goal, everybody gets an apple? But why do I have to have the apple from the lowest branch? Why could I not step up onto one of the other boxes and get an apple from a different branch? And so thinking about equity not only as like a starting point, but also what does it mean for the end point? And this is the first place where student agency becomes a big deal, right? Because when we set these sort of level equity goals at everybody gets an apple, then we're saying it doesn't matter what you as the student want and are thinking about and designing for yourself. Here's what we're giving you. You get this apple and you go on your way. But what if we took the idea and sort of came together with students as active learners and active participants in terms of setting their own goals and infused that with equity and thought, well, what else can the students do? What do the students want to be able to do, right? And so what does that look like if we challenge ourselves to think about equity not just as like a starting point so everybody can get to point A, but as a starting point and as a driving factor to let people go as far as they want to go? I don't have any answers for that, but it sounded good, right? Or maybe it didn't. You can tell me that later too. But as we think about it, it's really important to think about what we mean and what our goals are for equity. And so I know I have limited time, but I do want to pause and let you sort of think about in a super quick brainstorm at your table around what equity means to you. Like when you think about equity as a part of your work and what you're doing, what does that look like? And I'm going to also take the lowest denominator off the table. I'll tell you it doesn't mean numbers. That's diversity. That is not equity. So equity is at least a level up from having lots of different people in the room. Okay? So we'll take about 60 seconds for you to sort of brainstorm and talk at your tables about like, what do you think about equity? What do you think about this idea of equity, not just as a starting point, but as a sort of driver forward? All right, about 10 seconds to finish up your last comments. I know this isn't a lot of time, but hopefully it's a place to get you started. All right. So hopefully you had a lot of good, I know it was short, conversation at your table, but hopefully the thing about these sort of conversations is that they're never an end point. They're always just a starting point, and hopefully it's opportunity for you to continue to talk across the day with your colleagues who are currently at your table and other folks about what you're thinking about, and maybe take these conversations to coffee and lunch beyond today. And so what does this sort of look like in a real sort of practical sense? And for me, there are a lot of things that I think we can do and need to sort of do together. The first thing is look beyond the numbers to explore the why and the how. Quantitative data will tell you what, it will not tell you why and how. And so if all you are relying on are numbers, then you're missing a lot of the story. You're missing a lot of the point. And this is from a person who's a statistician. Like, if numbers are all you have, you are missing the point, and you've probably also lost some of your audience, right? Because there are some people who are not going to buy into the quantitative pieces of it wholesale, because they understand it's telling part of the story. And so to understand how you tell your story on campus, you have to understand what the data literacy is across the institution. And again, I'm sure this is not the issue that you have here, but on some campuses, people assume that just because you're in a space with a lot of really educated people that the data literacy is really, really high, and that is not always the case, right? We understand what we understand, but we also don't understand a lot. And so being able to sort of take a true look at what the data literacy is across the institution, how to not get everybody to be a data maven, but to get everybody to understand that they are a data person and that they can engage with the data in a way that's really meaningful, that is moving us toward data-informed decision support, I think is really helpful. And when we have this sort of increased data literacy across our institutions, it really does help us ask better questions, leads us to really explore the why and the how in much more fullness than we can if we're just looking and people have very limited understanding of that. Keep assumptions and deficit perspectives in check, which is often a challenge when we start to talk about equity gaps, success gaps, and really ground the conversations with and without data in sort of keeping those deficit perspectives in check, right? That's something that I think higher ed struggles with, but there are a lot of really good ways to do that, to really, not blame the students and, because again, none of you here and none of your colleagues, but somebody's like, well, if these students were better prepared, then we wouldn't be having these issues. They wouldn't be struggling, or any of the things that you sort of hear about students and can hear and have people think about students based on perhaps erroneous information. Question what there is to be learned. Do we have on blinders, right? Do we keep doing what we've always done? Or are we really, really open to exploring what it is that we need to do for the students that we have actually in our classroom and on our campuses today to be successful? Not the ideal student, not 18-year-old Bethany, wonderful student who did all her homework and came to class on time, and not true. But, right? Everybody is the ideal student. But the students that we have on our campuses are complex. They are dealing with a lot of issues that we, did not have to consider when, we went to college 1+ years ago. And so when we think about that, what does it mean for how we think about what it is that we're doing? And then really ensure that equity is kept at the forefront, because we can't really afford to be passive about it. As like data producers, you can't wait for the questions to be posed to you. And as consumers, you can't wait for the data people to ask the question that you want to ask. Like, it really is a conversation. So having those people in the room, having them engaged from the very beginning can be really helpful, because what you learn is you can start to anticipate what sort of questions they're going to ask. So even when they're not there, somebody can say, oh, well, I'm sure that if Susan was here, Susan would say, what about ABC, right? And so it really changes the way that we start to think about and interact with data, and keeping our work and sort of bringing the ethical and equitable approaches to our work to the forefront. And I would say not just for students, but also for faculty and staff, because students are the short timers on our campus, right? Whether they're going to leave of their own volition or ours, they're coming and going pretty quickly. But your faculty and staff are staying ideally for the long haul, and they are the people who are making the culture, making the student experience. And so also paying attention to equity when it comes to faculty and staff is also a really important way to think about this work. But I also realize that there are some deep-rooted challenges, right? So there are systems and structures in place that have a deficit approach. Like, what is your benchmarking looking like here at Kean? Is it a benchmark because this is where we want everybody to be? Or is it a, here's who's already at the top, how can we get everybody to where those people are? And more often than not, those people are going to be white male neurotypical performers and their experiences as the benchmark. And as we see a more wide variety of students, we have to understand that that may not actually be the benchmark. And benchmarking should really be, where do we want all students to be, not just who's currently at the top. Okay? And then we can't address these challenges without any sort of equity mindset. So what structures or barriers are affecting people's experiences? So for example, one of the things that we noticed on our campus that was affecting students' experiences was they weren't sure how to get high impact practice opportunities because everything was spread out everywhere. And so you had some students who were hearing about like funded internships or fellowships, and other students who weren't because they didn't have the networks, or they weren't in the groups, or they weren't in classes with these particular professors who were plugged in. And so one of the things that we've done is we've moved all of those things into one office so that it's sort of a one-stop shop for students. And so when we think about this, again, it wasn't that we've changed and gotten a lot of new programs or anything like that. We just made it easier for students to find. And so when we think about how to do this work, one of the important things is to not overlook the low-hanging fruit. Like, there are some easy things that we can do, and we don't want to leave those on the table. And then what information will help inform our understanding of these experiences, and how and why do those experiences differ? Like, there's a difference between a narrative and a story, right? So a narrative can be the big overarching picture. So for instance, say the American dream is the narrative, right? But inside of that, there are a lot of different stories. Everybody's story about where they're trying to go, how they're getting there is different. And that's what our campuses are like. It might be the Kean narrative, but everybody's Kean story is different. And so what voices are here, and what experiences do we know about, and what experiences and what voices are missing? And what are we not getting? What are we not able to address because we don't know, right? And then the other piece is that the information has to be contextual. Decontextualized information is almost useless, right? Because it can lead us to make decisions in ways that don't really make sense in the context of how they actually work. And so having the context in terms of any topic, race, socioeconomics, first gen status, culture, any of those things, having the context along with the information to inform our understanding is key. And all of this is because what we find is there are these single stories, and there's a danger in the single story. If you've not watched Chimamanda Adichie's wonderful TED Talk, it's about 20 minutes long on this, you should. But the one thing that she says, the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. And so they make one story become the only story, right? And so when we think about this, what are some things that are in danger of being a single story in higher ed? Equity, right? People hear equity and they think race, right? Student success. People hear student success, they think first to second year retention rates and graduation rates. Those are some metrics of success, but even those metrics leave out a whole host of students. If you have transfer students, if you have non-traditional students, if you have students who are in dual enrollment or any other sort of program that is not coming to your campus within 12 months of graduating from high school, they are not included in the typical student success metrics, right? And most people don't understand that. They think, oh, this is everybody. No, it's not. It's a very particular group of students at a very particular point in time. First generation students, right? That in some places that's become a proxy for Black and brown low income students. I know some first gen students that you may have heard of, Bronny James, Natalia Bryant. They are first gen. They are definitely not poor, right? And so what do we risk by sort of understanding or not understanding how these things have become sort of co-opted, especially if you're newer into higher ed in the space and you haven't seen the evolution of it across time? It's easy to think that, oh, this is what this has always meant. Non-traditional students, right? So what is it? What are some of the narratives about non-traditional students, and how does that impact the way that we think about and treat those students, plan and program for those students on our campuses? Deficit language, which we already sort of talked about. I think general education, right? Gen Ed is a checkbox. It's the thing to get done. It's not as seen as necessarily a part of a true integrative part of the learning experience. Assessment. It's a single story, which we'll talk about in a second. And data, right? People think data and they think numbers. And so there are lots of narratives around it surrounding assessment. I would say, again, some of these narratives may not exist on your campus because you're having an assessment summit. So yay, I have to admit that when he's like, welcome to our annual assessment summit, like that nobody like jumped up and cheered. It was, you know, that's probably just the assessment nerd in me though. But most of the things when we think about the narratives surrounding assessment are negative, right? People think compliance. People think reporting. People think just something else to do that's being driven by outside sort of entities that don't really impact what we're doing. And I'd like for us to think differently about that. Assessment is not an end of itself, but it's a vehicle for educational improvement. And when questions about educational mission and values are skipped over, then assessment threatens to become an exercise in measuring what's easy, not what matters. And that's when you get the sort of compliance pieces. That's when you get people are like, why are we doing this? This is busy work, you know, or people who just won't do it, right? But when we go back and we tie it to our mission and values, we tie it to the work that is meaningful to us and for us, then it takes on just a different life on our campus. And so hopefully you've seen this before. This is the NILOA assessment philosophies sort of handout, and the link is there. But if you think about assessment philosophies, like where would you put yourself in these quadrants, right? So in these quadrants, at the top we have compliance and reporting and measurement, which is what most people think about when they think about assessment if they don't work in an assessment office. But assessment people probably are living in this bottom quadrant and wish that you all would live there with us, right? It's really student-centered, having students actively participate in the process to learn about their own learning. It's steeped in teaching and learning. How do we enhance teaching and student learning and development, address faculty and staff questions about teaching and learning? Assessment is for doing. It's for gathering information so that we can move towards continuous improvement, not in the accreditation sense, but continuous improvement in terms of, are we meeting our mission? Are we meeting the promises that we make to families and to our students when they choose us with their time, talent, and dollars? And so here's some easy definitions from Peggy Mackey and Palomba and Banta, Trudy Banta. And so what assessment is, and this is what we use on our campus, so I really just stole this from our website, is that it's the fit between what we expect our students to understand and be able to do and what they actually demonstrate, right? So what do we think they could do? What can they actually do? And then it's the systematic collection, review, and use, note use, of information about educational programs undertaken for the purpose of improving student learning and development. And the real takeaway is that assessment is for learning. It's for doing, right? It's really using assessment to enhance teaching and learning, whether that's through looking at student learning and development or through looking at program effectiveness. Is your program functioning effectively and equitably in the context of the overall institutional mission? And these are just some sort of pieces that are important in quality assessment, right? It needs to be reliable. It needs to be valid. There's awareness of bias that may exist in the assessment practices. It needs to be practical. Like, assessment should be work, but not a lot of extra work. If it doesn't fit into the work that you're doing, you may not be doing it right, right? It should have a clear purpose, and it should lead to action. If you're collecting data just to fill in a report, or just collecting report without any feedback, without any sort of action to improvement, then what are you doing? And so when we think about this from an equity context, what does equity-minded assessment look like? It checks for biases and asks reflective questions throughout the process to address any assumptions that may exist. It uses multiple sources of evidence appropriate for the students being assessed and the assessment effort. So how do we make the most space for students to be able to demonstrate that they are learning the material? Not only that they're learning it in a, I know my multiplication tables because I memorized them in 3rd grade, but can it be applied, right? How can I take this learning that is happening in classroom A and apply it to learning and build on learning that is happening in classroom B and apply it to learning in a real world context in opportunity C, right? How do we sort of let them see the learning take place across time? Increase transparency in assessment results. Like, tell the people what you learned, what happened, what are you gonna do? Ensure that the data can be meaningfully disaggregated and interrogated. Inequities hide in aggregate data. And so if you want to see where inequities are, you need to be able to pull it apart in every sort of meaningful way possible. That doesn't mean that everybody gets to see the thing with the small ends, but that in the process, people know that this data has been thoroughly looked at and that there's no room for folks to try and like hide pieces where there may be problems for students. And then make evidence-based decisions that address the issues in context. And how do you do that? You do it, one, with the plan. The process is important to set up on the front end, right? Knowing what we're going to do at the front end is super important. Collecting and sharing data facilitates dialogue. Always talk to the people. When you think you've communicated enough, communicate some more. And by communicate, I don't mean an email with a whole lot of stuff in it. Act. Closing the loop is important. How do you get out into the community and close the loop with not only like the people on the committee who may have commissioned the people in your department, but how do you close the loop with students? How do you get that sort of feedback from them so that they understand what it is that you learned and can tell you whether or not what you learned and what sort of conclusions you came from that data actually makes sense? Because, 40-plus-year-old Bethany's mind does not work in the same way that an 18 to 22-year-old does. And so especially when you're collecting qualitative data, the thing that you think something means is probably not what it means, right? And so asking students, getting that sort of feedback and that check from them can be really important. Having a holistic view of student success through the data-informed decision support process will move things forward, not having data and different pieces exist in a vacuum, right? Knowing that it's part of an ecosystem. Have concrete action items with deadlines, and then circle back with people, accountability. Like, people like to know what you learned, what you did, even if it didn't work the way you thought it would, because it keeps them engaged and it means they're more likely to answer the next time you call and need to collect some information. And so one of the things, and again, I sort of hijacked this from a slide that we use it on my campus in my office, but the point of this slide is to show that this is an ecosystem, that none of these things stand alone, right? So it's your institutional ecosystem, but it's also connected to the curriculum, which I assume includes significant learning experiences, integration, the liberal arts, STEM, all of those things. Learning outside of courses, so high impact practices, internships, study away, any of those sort of pieces that you incorporate. What are the implementation strategies for these? Your academic plan, your courses, educational outcomes. But then our sort of foundational influences are the content, the sequencing of the courses, the instructional pieces of that. What resources do students and the institution have access to? And then the assessment, so that we're able to see that, again, we're doing what we said we were going to do, and that we're doing it as well as possible in that context, and how can we do it better? I'm wrapping soon, so you can ask me some questions if you have them. And so these are just really the sort of key takeaways. There are lots of data. People have lots of data. Data doesn't make any sense if it's not contextualized. And so having data means nothing if that data is not taken and turned into information, and then with an equity-centered, collaborative, contextualized dissemination, then maybe you'll get to data-informed decision support if you're lucky, with your eyes, fingers, toes, and everything like crossed, right? But I also don't want you to think that I'm like standing here and like all Pollyannish and like naive about this. I know that these things come with challenges. They come with challenges to resources, costs, culture, competing priorities, perceptions of assessment, and what's being done with the data, data collection, closing the loop. All of those things are challenges, but they're also opportunities. How do we break down silos and work across and work with our colleagues on campus so that we're able to really have a collaborative experience so that we understand the students' experiences on our campus? How do we close the loop? How do we work to sort of change the culture and the perception around assessment on our campuses? And the real truth is, all assessment is local. You probably noticed I didn't tell you a ton of things to do. I gave some big ideas, But that's because I could say, oh, here are the 10 things that we've done at McAllister, and it's made all the difference. And then you go to implement them, and then you'd be like, what the hell was she talking about? Like, none of that's working here, right? Because assessment is local, you have to take into account all of the sort of context, culture, politics, resources, everything around it that is going to influence and impact the ecosystem. Think about practical significance. As a statistician, I know people love statistical significance. That's really important in some instances, but in this instance, what is really going to make the most impact for the most students? Balance our help-harm quotient, right? Who's going to be benefited, who may be potentially harmed, and really understanding what the impact is in a really practical way. Be clear about your equity goals, not only as an institution, but inside of your academic units, inside of your other offices and those sorts of things. Being clear about that helps you have sort of a compass or a North Star to sort of draw people back to when inevitably you sort of wander off the road, right? Take every opportunity to shape the perception and culture of assessment. I think this assessment summit is an excellent example of taking an opportunity to really move things around. Understand that language matters. Like, the words that we choose have meaning. And not only do they have like dictionary meaning, but they also have like a contextual meaning, and they are going to land with people in different ways. And if you have even the inkling of doubt or question or concern about language, ask somebody. Ask your like trusted, kitchen table group or whatever of folks who can help you sort of sort that out. And also, nobody should see something that has only been seen by one person's eyes, right? Like, somebody else should have seen it before it leaves your desk. And then at its core, assessment really is about students, right? It's about the students, it's about their learning, it's about their success inside and outside of the classroom, and their sort of ultimate experience. We really want to leave our students in better shape than they were when they came here, and we want to do the least amount of harm possible. And again, I know it won't be hard for you all to believe, but there are some institutions out there where students are being really harmed, and we want to be really, really thoughtful and careful about that. There's no one right way to do it, but you got to start somewhere. Please note that there's no arrow going backwards. So you can't go back, but you can go other ways. And let's treat it as a learning experience. Let's learn together that no matter how much we know, we all still have a lot to learn. So that's me. Thank you.
Great job. Great job. Great job.
Thanks. And I'm happy to answer any questions if people have them.
Before you do that, though, so don't run away. Lots of things. First of all, I want to acknowledge the strategic analytics team and the division of Sadie who put this together today. So can we give them a round of applause as well? And that's how you got here. That team, Dr. Ahern's team, and Sadie, and many of the individuals are scattered throughout the room. They put together this summit, took a lot of time to do so, and it's really important. I think you're acknowledged several times how important it is for everybody to establish a culture of assessment. Feel free to sit down. Thank you. So what I want to say is this. Anybody hear a lot of information that they could use? Okay, so this is what I want you to do at your table, and it's just a quick exercise, and we're okay with time, right? So it's quick. Hi. I liked when you said that one story isn't everybody's story, and we have to be careful to capture that. And I think I can use that instead of just creating from numbers to narratives, numbers to stories to the narrative. Make sure they're aligned. Next. That's how that's going to happen at your table. It's going to be quick. I saw this, I heard this, and this is what I can do about it. I want you to take a few minutes, but be quick, popcorn around, we don't have a lot of time, and take about 4 minutes, and I'll pull you right back up there. What did you hear that you could use, or what did you hear that inspired you to do something different? Oh, look at that.
We're all experts.
Okay. Because I saw it was 10:30. I was like, I just.
I was thinking about like kind of the conversation we had before, right? Is it right? Is it out, right? So that wines out, and I think a lot about it's related to the right? We assume so my takeaway here is they said on so many businesses just keep communicating. So it's also not just sitting there for an hour.
I asked, so I looked through the availability. If they're available.
Good. Yeah, we have, there's the NJ Edge thing and STEM. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth.
Okay, that's good. You want me to add that in there or just like follow? We just had the retirement ceremony. Yeah, but other than that,
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
yeah.
One minute. 1 minute.
I saw the image, like.
Mike Vigili, Associate Director of Learning.
Let's start finishing our thought, finishing our conversation. Okay, let's pull it back to the top so we can stay on schedule today. Great. I'm not going to ask all of you to share because I saw a lot of you sharing. The idea here today is when you bring somebody in, we don't want just a lecture and you to move on to the next session. we're hoping you grab something either from something you saw that inspired you to change or something somebody else said that we can put into action. So we're going to open it up. We have 2 minutes where we're going to do a Q&A. Then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ahern and her team to give some directions on what's next. So I'll start here. We'll take any questions from the front, back, side. Yes. We have a question over here? Oh, okay.
I don't know that it is, but I didn't quite understand about reaching for the apple at a higher branch and going beyond equalizing the playing field, because the way I see it is that there are many playing fields and different playing fields for different people, and equity is more complicated than just leveling the playing field, because you have to balance true equity against the equity that you're delivering to everyone, not just to one set of individuals. So I don't know how that relates to your point about reaching higher for one person that doesn't need the high stool, but maybe you could explain that a little bit further.
You want me to take that one? No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, so I think the one thing that I would say about that is that when I, in my thinking around this, the level playing field and like sort of, that's another level of equality, actually, right? Leveling the playing field so that everybody is sort of starting at the same place is another level of equality. And I think that I would say we're not disagreeing, that what we're saying is that there are a lot of levels and complexity inside of it. And I think that part of equity is not just saying, here, everybody gets an apple from the lowest branch, but also allowing learners, in this case, to be active participants to decide, okay, here's what success looks like for me. And so sometimes that lowest branch apple is the first place, but they still want to keep going. So using like the steps as like, okay, yep, I got this apple. And so maybe the first apple is their bachelor's degree, it's an associate's. And then when they can get to the next step, it's a master's, it's in education terms, but in lots of different ways. And so I think for me, understanding that what we may see as the sort of success metric on a broad scale is only one level of that, but that for other folks, that also needs to be a little bit more active and nuanced.
So maybe equity in that case is not for those that are going to reach higher than the first branch, it's maybe taking away their stool. That's equity. I don't know that I really believe that, but
Yeah, I was like,
Okay.
I don't think that taking away their stool is getting us to equity, but I think it's more nuanced, and maybe what both of us are saying is that it is much more nuanced than we often give that conversation credit for, and so trying to have that conversation fast can also feel challenging. So I know we're at time, but I have a workshop right after this, and so we can use some of that time to answer questions.
Perfect.
Also.
So we'll have an opportunity to collect some questions as well. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ahern to give us some housekeeping items, right? Yes. Here, you want to take this? Great.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I am Susan Ahern. I'm the Director of the Office of Accreditation and Assessment. I believe I know most of you here today, but I do want to thank you all for joining us, as Dr. Salvatore said, our second annual assessment, and we're calling it annual. You know, we're taking the words from Dr. Reppoletta of being built to last, so that is our goal. And I want to just thank Dr. Salvatore, Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Lozada, the whole Sadie division, our planning committee, our presenters. So we, as you can see, we have a full day ahead. So I also wanted to thank Dr. Miller. You know, when you were up here speaking, I'm like scribbling notes away over there. One of the things that really resonated with me when we first talked was our theme is navigating past, present, and future. And one of the things that you had said was, what worked for us in the past, will it work for us in the future? And that really hit me, and I'm like, you know what, it's always changing, and we have to keep up with those changes. So a lot of our events today will kind of touch on those. So as you can see, we have everything set up. Now, here is our schedule. Also on the back of your name badge, there's a QR code. You could use that to access the schedule again. That was a little thing from Catherine, who has been working extremely hard. Catherine and Rachel, you know, a lot of work went into this. So, you know, we just want to make sure any questions, any issues, please, we have the help desk right there. The other thing on the tables, you can see there is information about our equity hackathon. So we're going to give a little session about that during lunch. So please come back and join us for that. So up next, we're going to have a workshop that is going to be facilitated by Dr. Miller. But before we do that, we're going to take about a 5-10 minute break. Get coffee, there's breakfast still out there, you know, and then we'll come back and we'll have that workshop, and then we'll be off to the rest of the day. But thank you all again for coming. We really appreciate it.
Let's find our way back to our seats so we can begin. Find your way back. Finish those conversations. Head on back. Wonderful. Thank you in the back there. I appreciate it. Yep. Find a seat. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, everyone. So we are going to get ready for the second part of Dr. Miller's presentation. And that will go till about 11:15, and then we will be moving on to our first set of workshops. As you see, I have the schedule up there, but I'm going to bring Dr. Miller back up, and she will take it away.
Great, thank you. So I know we didn't have a ton of time for questions earlier, and to prove that I am flexible. So I think what we'll do with this time is I'm happy to take any more questions that folks have, or challenges or anything like that. Because really, for me, workshops are really for working, so there's no other additional PowerPoint. You don't get another 30 minutes of me just standing here talking. It really is meant to sort of be like a mind share and really work and problem solve. So I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have that we didn't get to during the session. Okay, good one right there.
Thank you very much. Sometimes when I'm on campus, I have two different roles. So I teach in a classroom, but I also work in a department that is very much the behind-the-scenes department and not student-facing. And so all this, I keep putting on like my academic hat, and I was like, great, I could use this in my classroom. But what have you seen work well for the departments that are the behind-the-scenes, not student-facing, not like in their, how have you seen them make changes to be equity-focused?
Yep, that's a really great question, and I have a really great answer. Also, so yes, my title is Associate Provost and Chief Data Officer, but I work like up until probably, as it's 8 months ago, I was the Director of Institutional Research and Assessment, and so most of my career has actually been spent in non-student facing offices. And so thinking about how to do this work and how to sort of bring that lens to the work, I think has been really important to me. And so one of the easy ways to do it from an IR perspective is to disaggregate data, right? So making sure that we're breaking it apart, not just having, white students and then BIPOC, like, nope, pulling everybody apart every single way that we can get it apart to look at it. And then having the conversations with decision makers and stakeholders about what that looks like. From an assessment side, one of the things that we've done is we have been a really great partner with our Center for Scholarship and Teaching to do like professional development sort of opportunities with faculty in those spaces, and to work directly with faculty to go like into the classroom. So we have this one project called the Classroom Community and Connectedness Project, which is really dedicated to how do we sort of increase people's understanding and desire and like belonging and community in the classroom, because research shows that when you feel connected in the classroom environment, your learning increases, right? And so basically what that is we use a participatory action framework. Faculty volunteer, they sign up. We go into their classroom for an hour and do like a graffiti exercise. So big Post-it papers and Post-it notes, and ask students 4 simple questions. What's working well to build community? What's hindering community? What can the students do? And what can the faculty do? And then the students do the quick sort of like analysis on the Post-it notes. And then we turn that around to faculty within 24 to 48 hours so that they are able to say, go in and say, okay, here's what I heard, here's what I'm going to do differently. Even if they're not going to do anything differently, being able to say to the students, I heard you and I'm not doing this, and here's some of the rationale behind it, is still really powerful. And so we've done this for 3 or 4 years now. And the very first semester that we did it, we went to 20 classrooms over a week, and we do it like in the first 3 weeks. It's in that third week of class. And 85% of the students said that it made a difference. And the ones who said it didn't make a difference, it was because they didn't see any changes. And it's low-hanging fruit. It's stuff like we don't know the students' names in the class. We sit in the same seats all the time. We don't get to know other people. We don't like connect outside of class. And so like just like communication, and again, sort of like low stakes things that I think we take for granted, but in a post-COVID world are much harder for students. And so that seemed very vague and generic, but if you want to talk to me later about like your specific office and some ideas, I'm happy to do that also. Any other questions? I'm not standing between you all and lunch. Come on. Okay, we got one question and then we'll come to you.
Could you expand a little bit on, this morning you mentioned practical significance, and sometimes we are so focused on the numbers and the percentages and how well we're doing that we don't look at anecdotally the impact and have those conversations that are more meaningful. So if you could expand that would be great.
Yep. So statistical significance, and like other statisticians in the room don't like pelt me with rotten fruit. But the real truth is, if you want to increase statistical significance, you just pump more like samples into the data, right? Like that, it's about the size. But when we think about practical significance, it's like, what is it that we can do that we know is going to make a difference? And like when people think about statistical significance, they're like, well, if it's not going to make a difference for 500 students, then is it worth doing? And my question is, if it's going to make a difference for 50 students, why is it not worth doing? Right? And so it's really thinking about, as you said, beyond the like quantitative aspects, but really to the qualitative and the more sort of nuanced aspects that may get lost when you don't have big numbers. And I work on a small campus, and so that's a really like resonant point for me. And because there are places where the ends are gonna get small really fast, and so it's never gonna show up as statistically significant, but we know that there is something happening that is causing that particular group of students to have a hard experience on our campus. And just because it's not statistically significant doesn't mean that we don't need to do anything about it.
Hi. I'm just curious if your campus has an archive, or maybe your department saves material, and if you reflect on that very often. Related to assessment.
We do have an archive, and I don't go there. I mean, just because the sort of, so prior to my life as an IR and assessment person, I was an early Americanist. And so I just have a very different sort of understanding of material culture. And so our archivists, like past, have had a save everything mentality. So it makes it just really hard for me to go like to the actual archives. That's what I mean when I say I don't go there. But in our office, we do have a history of assessment. And I'm actually super duper fortunate because our director of assessment is, so this will tell you how new assessment is at Macalester, but our director of assessment is actually the architect of our assessment program because it's still just that new. And so she is so there. So we have all of that sort of like institutional memory. Not that we weren't really doing assessment before then. I was going to try and dress it up, but no. And so yes, in that case, we do have inside of our office like the sort of assessment. But what we do so we're in charge of institution-wide assessment in terms of like college-wide learning outcomes, both curricular and co-curricular assessment supporting departments. And so we actually have a Google site, so all departments can go in and see the assessment data from their cycles, their self-study, like all of that stuff is there so that as department chairs turn over and all of that sort of stuff, it's in one place. And we also are in the process of building out a site like that for our co-curricular colleagues. Yep, and I mean, and our real sort of the other thing I'll say about that is that our real philosophy is that document is a verb, right? Like if you don't have any documentation, did you do it? And it's also for us because, you know, we have our comprehensive accreditation site visit coming up, and I wasn't there the last time we had a comprehensive visit. I've only been in McAllister 5 years. And so like having that sort of documentation so that the next people can sort of keep up and pick up and keep things moving is really important. Any other questions or comments? Oh, here we go.
As a behavior analyst who does single subject experimental design research, as a behavior analyst who does single subject experimental design research relying on social significance, this is super exciting for me to hear people who are from other fields and looking definitely at exactly the issue of, yeah, it worked for the group, but what about that kid? Or what about that student or that faculty member? So this is very cool, and as a thing to adopt, and I hope we do something like this, I'm very excited to have somebody come to my classroom if we decide to pilot something like this here. Pretty exciting stuff. So it's just a comment, not a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that was just a comment. No, I haven't forgotten the question, but I was wondering whether you're expecting a response or a comment. Okay. This is great. If you could elaborate on the equity further and then disaggregation of data, and I'll give a context where this request is coming from. Let's say first-gen students is one of the items that many equity-based assessment focuses on. That is true for overwhelming probably institutions when there are mostly non-first-gen students and there are some first-gen students you need to disaggregate between whether they are first-gen or not. If an institution has a significant number of first-gen population, then that disaggregation is not going to help you much. It does help, but it's not to the level that an institution that has very small first-gen students. How do we drill down even from that first-gen students further to disaggregate that data so that we can look at a smaller populations or subpopulation within that first-gen students? And it could be the same thing for race and ethnicity-related variables. For example, Hispanic students. If 40% of the student body is made of Hispanic students, that is useful, but is not going to do a whole lot. So what the national norm is to focus on what as you put on the slide, white men and all of those, and these metrics have been developed based on those assumptions and those demographic characteristics in mind. But not all institutions kind of fit in that box. And what do you suggest for those institutions who serve primarily first-gen students, minority students, and so forth, and how do you really disaggregate that even further down?
Okay, yep. Thank you. That's a great and complicated question. And so the first part of this answer, it won't be dissatisfying, but don't super duper clutch your pearls. Well, I think part of it is that until statistics and institutional research and the sort of methodologies that we use wrestle with the sort of foundational underpinnings of white supremacy inside of our field, we will never be able to do that work in a way that is going to look at it differently. So I'll start there, right? Like with just that base assumption. But the other part of that is that people do not live in these sort of boxes that we try to put them in. And so the best way to sort of look at that is to do one level of disaggregation. So say you say, okay, I'm going to disaggregate and pull everybody apart by like using the race and ethnicity factors. But now that's about to even look different because of the changes to census and how we're collecting. Like that's a later story. Okay. But then take that and try and like intersect it with another level of their identity. Right. And and I've been trying to do this. And so if anybody has any ideas, I'm all ears. And you can do it in a sort of philosophical way. Like I can draw it out on the board, what I think it will look like, but methodologically it's not clean. And so that's the piece that gets really hard, because when you are putting all of these sort of factors and intersections together, it's hard to keep it, because then it just gets to be a lot. So you'd have to do probably multiple levels, probably like a HLM or a MLM, like a multi-level model, or some sort of hierarchical linear modeling, which could probably get you to one sort of depth of that. But one of the ways that we try to combat that is like, yep, we pulled this apart. And so say that we were on a campus that had like a high first gen population. The question is, what is it about first gen that we want to know? Like, what question are we trying to answer? And again, just because someone is first gen or not, depending on what definition your institution uses, doesn't mean that they fit all the sort of like characteristics, right? And I will own my own sort of bias around like first gen language and who's in and who's out. As a person who was what I would describe as 1.5 gen, like yes, my mom had a bachelor's degree by the time I went to college, but she got it when I was in the 11th grade, which meant I didn't qualify for any first gen programming. But I also didn't have any of the like cultural skills and sort of inside family knowledge to navigate college in the way that we assume that people do. But also, I have a PhD. My kid is a senior. What does me going to college 20 years ago have to do with him being able to navigate college now? Right? And so, again, all of these questions around what are we doing, how are we doing it, just because we did this then or labeled this then because it made sense because this population was different, does it work now? Are we asking the right questions? Are we looking at the right groups? I mean, a rising tide lifts all boats. So ideally, if these students are getting the help, then yes, it's going to help everyone if we find a way to bring it to scale. But more often than not, we don't. We just like keep it in the program pockets for a myriad of reasons that are not about students. But I digress. Did that answer your question, or was it just super messy and a lot of words? Hey, any other questions, comments? We still got 10 minutes. I just say, y'all just want to sit here and stare at me?
Thank you. One of your comments really hit me and perhaps helped me finish one of my arcs. Stereotypes are incomplete. Can you tease that out a little bit? I it really resonated with me because so often we want to put these things in boxes like your first gen. Your first gen, even from this table, we had 4 different versions of first gen. So in the end, what's it really hitting? But could you kind of tease that out just a little bit?
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. And so I will say that that's not my story. Chimamanda Adichie, who's a fantastic Nigerian author, tells this story during her TED Talk. And she talks about like this story where when she was growing up, they had, this is her word, not mine, a houseboy and Fele, and that she sort of like had this image in her mind of who this person was. And it turned out to be not completely true. And she had created a stereotype of this person because they were working inside of their house and her mom would sometimes like send things home with them of, oh, well, they must be poor, that like had created just this whole story. And then she learned more about this person and she was like, well, those parts were true, but it wasn't the complete story. And so it's the same with stereotypes, right? Like we can have these sort of ideas about, but I think what it does is we can have these ideas about like, here's what a student is. Oh, this student is first gen. Here's what that means. Here's what this student is. This student is, high need. This student is pale. This student is this. This student is that. And so here's what that means. And what we don't realize about the impacts of stereotypes is it influences the way that we treat and interact with people. Even if we think about from a faculty and staff perspective, like say you have, so lots of campuses have a group for new faculty who are like on the tenure track. And some places have a group for faculty of color to like help them navigate the tenure track. That's like specifically for them. And so, yes, like give people help if they need it. But the question is, again, this goes back to the system and structures and barriers versus individuals. Is like, why do BIPOC faculty who have just navigated the same like structures that everybody else has to get a doctorate and get this job now need special help to get tenure at your institution when other people do not? Like, that's not a them problem. That's a structural, like, systemic problem. And so until we like ask those questions and examine what stereotypes we have in our mind and what that does for how we plan, how we program, who we think needs special help and who doesn't, then it doesn't change the way the institution, operates. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Comments?
I have a comment earlier on. Thank you. Early this morning, you indicated that together we need to, and you had 5 different points. The last one kind of struck me and said, ensure that equity is kept at the forefront. I think we do a great job here at this institution and in this state, but broadly speaking, if you were in a different part of the country, Florida per se, how would you convey that message? How would you indicate that work be done across the country? We know that the political landscape is changing. And so I was just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yep, thank you. So I will say, even if we're in a place where it does not feel and it is not visible that equity work is under attack, it's probably still under attack. Like, let's just be honest there. It may not be in the light yet. It may not be getting the headlines, but somewhere somebody is doing something that is seeking to sort of cut resources or undermine some of that work. And so I think for me, it's always about how can we do the best next right thing, right? So what are you going to do when people aren't watching? What are you going to do when they are watching? Ideally, they're going to be relatively similar. And so So I have a friend who actually does work at an institution in Florida and is the dean of belonging and multicultural life. I think that's her title. If not, I mess it up all the time, so she wouldn't even care. But something to that effect. And one of the things that I think is really important is, again, to have that expanded view of equity, because the people who are seeking to attack equity are seeking to attack a very specific sort of, they have a very specific way and view of equity, and so they are seeking to attack basically race and, you know, like critical, like you see it in critical race theory, you see it in what books are being banned, those sorts of things. So they're seeking to attack a very particular sort of segment of the work. And so one of the things that I think is really important to do is to do the work and do the work well, and to expand people's views of equity and what it includes, because it really does need to include more than people think, right? So when we think equity, a lot of times people think race, but there's also ability status. There's also, you know, size sort of challenges. Think about if you are in a traditional classroom with stadium seating, those seats are tight, right? And so even thinking about equity not as trying to give someone something that they don't deserve or some sort of special treatment, but thinking of it wide, like inclusion. How do we make this engagement at our institution the best sort of experience it can be for the most people possible? For the people who chose to show up here for whatever reason, how are we going to make sure that they are having their needs met, they're having the sort of best experience that they can, and that they're leaving with what they came for? And so I think when we do that with students at the forefront, with student success, with faculty, with institutional success at the forefront, then it leads us to think about it differently and to show up in the work in a different way. And sometimes that means having multiple conversations. It's the nuance. It's meeting people where they are and helping them see that while equity may not, you know, impact you today because, yeah, you're not gonna, you know, wake up and turn black, but you might have a different ability status tomorrow, temporary or long-term. Like, so there are lots of places where we can help people see inequity and where they may be impacted, and that I find can often be a foray into the conversations.
Yeah, I think we're just about time. Thank you again, Dr. Miller. Thank you so much. All right, so we are going to get ready to start our next sessions. As you can see, we have 3. The workshop for tools and tech will be held right here in this room. But what if we didn't, using ungrading to assess learning, is going to be down in room 204. And that's all on the schedule. They're out at the front. And also, if you use the QR code on the back of your badge. And then our final session, the one that is the Cougar Climb, a case study of an evolving retention program, will be down in room 208. So those are going to start at 11:30. So if you'd like to grab something else, make sure you grab your giveaway, your to-go mug that we have for everyone. You grab one of those. And then we'll be back here for the lunch. But as I said, we will be here all day. We have the information desk if anyone has any questions. And again, we just want to thank you for being a part of our event today. And I think we're off to a great start. So thank you, everyone.